Well, I'm a gun graduate, and I was an editor of the student newspaper there and strung for various other local publications. And in college, I was on my college daily, and I had an internship at the Times Tribune of Palo Alto. And I've said several times that I remember the founding editor of the weekly coming to our journalism classes at Gun, recruiting for stringers. Years ago, I covered Santa Clara County council meetings, Mountain View council meetings, San Mateo Transit about the Devil's Bypass or tunnel, and I didn't imagine that years later I would be the subject of press scrutiny regarding my proposals, or potentially what influence I could have as a commissioner or council. Although I think it's excellent training to have been a journalist trying to look at policy and how decisions are made. I worked only very briefly in journalism so many years ago, worked in advertising for a few years as a writer in the creative department of ad agencies, and moved back to Palo Alto from San Francisco in '93 and worked at Earth Day. Bay Area Action was producing an Earth Day event, and at that time I became more environmentally conscious and I heard about Earth Day and wanted to get involved. In fact, met Peter Dreckmeyer there, and when Peter Dreckmeyer transitioned from being an activist to being a policy setter and a leader, that had an influence on my wanting to get more involved in policy here. And I produced a series of concerts that were community-oriented, and in fact, to the extent most of my concerts were at Cubberley Theater and Auditorium, and since the early '90s, I've, in my own way, been wondering, what more could we do with Cubberley? I'm not part of the planning commission right now for Cubberley, although I would be interested in contributing to the idea of what potential it has as an arts center. Obviously, we have a big proposal in front of us right now about turning 27 University into an arts district, arts and innovation district. I'm just digesting the packet on that. Although when it was first announced to the public, at least at a council meeting in March, I was one of a lot of people who immediately went to where the Palo Alto Weekly's coverage of the event and added my off-the-cuff and knee-jerk and sometimes a little too spirited reactions. I wrote about it. I have a blog. I have two blogs, one called Plastic Alto that mostly covers art but sometimes covers policy. And then since I started this campaign in August, I have a blog called SWIAM, or the New Residentialist Platform, that I've written maybe 20 short essays. It doesn't about policy now and why I'm running and how I'm running. It's not a traditional politician's site. It doesn't say where you can donate money. In fact, I am running sort of a minimalist campaign in that I am certainly not asking for contributions. I'm not accepting contributions. I don't think I'll spend any money. I'm just sort of doing this old school and purist. Part of the reason is that I feel on a national level, money can corrupt the process. I've been following avidly Citizens United, which is a Supreme Court ruling that has allowed, for example, corporations to make donations to political campaigns beyond what had been allowed before Roberts and Scalia joined the Supreme Court. And there are many people across the country who feel that in itself is a very big problem. They're working to try to overthrow Citizens United. There was an article in today's Chronicle. San Francisco actually has a ballot initiative where they're asking the citizens of San Francisco to say as a community that they want Congress to, by a 2/3 majority, to try to overthrow Citizens United. I went to a forum on that event back in March. In fact, I texted our mayor, Yahweh Yeh, on the suggestion that maybe we could have in Palo Alto a non-binding initiative suggesting that that's a problem. It's not one of the core issues of my campaign, but I think it is relevant that I am distinctive among the 6 vying for the 4 spots in that I am running my campaign in a way that I think is consistent with what would be better for American democracy and the election process if money were less of a factor.
Okay, let me jump in here.
That was a long introduction.
It's okay. That's all right.
I skipped ahead to a couple of the issues.
And we're going to come back to those as we talk here. You 3 years ago had a similar approach to your funding of your campaign, as I recall.
That part has not changed.
Right. And at that time, you, I think, described your candidacy as sort of as an arts platform, and it was very much focused on the arts and protecting the arts and being a promoter of the arts in Palo Alto. I'm assuming that you still believe in all those things. Have you developed a broader kind of statement of candidacy in terms of other issues that you are passionate and care about at this point?
Well, initially, because I'm an arts professional, initially I thought that was perhaps the only area I was qualified to comment. But since that time, I've attended many more meetings, read many more articles, had many more conversations with citizens and/or stakeholders and/or commissioners and/or council members. Having run in 2009, I have developed relationship and friendship and lines of communication with most, if not all, of the council and many commissioners, and I do get traction or get heard on many ideas I've come up with. And I actually applied for 2 different commissions, the Library Commission and the Planning Commission. I wasn't seated either time, but I have boned up on a lot of a broader spectrum of issues. I believe there's 40 or 50 topics that I've felt strong enough to either comment on your site, my site, send a note to council, or a text to a commissioner or a council member. I'm meaning to generate that list. But actually, for this campaign, although I'm running in a somewhat minimalist form, I am trying to focus on what I think is a very big and often undercovered issue regarding land use, and strictly put, do developers have too much say and too much sway on policy? And more specifically, as I started to make that it's in my campaign statement, the number of even more planned community PC zoning projects that have popped up, I would like to make the bulk of my time between now and November 6th becoming a better resource on how to add to the discussion, and there are people who are talking about this. My understanding, as I've started to look at it again, is that there is or was a planning commission subcommittee that Karen Holman, when she was a commissioner, was part of, and I don't know how far they got or what they actually came up with, but I think there are a lot of people wanting to look at that right now again, or continue to look at it. It came up at the candidates forum a little bit that we had 2 weeks ago.
So let me just follow up on that particular issue. There have been several major development proposals that have either already been approved or that are now under discussion. They include the police station, the public safety building that could be potentially built as a public benefit by a developer. They include the one you referred to, the Arriaga proposal, that would propose to build a theater as a public benefit in exchange for greater development potential. What is your view of the PC process, and what reforms do you think, if any, are needed in that process?
Well, also I wanted to add a little contextual point. Info Palo Alto, a product of the Palo Alto Weekly, which is, I think, the paper of record in Palo Alto. We have at least 3 news sources, but this one has done the most consistent job over the years. Has a statistic that says in 1985 the value of commercial real estate in Palo Alto was about $5 billion, and that as of 2012 that commercial real estate value is now closer to $25 billion, meaning there's a delta or an increase of $20 billion in the value of that segment. And so my question is, and again, my background is journalism, well, to the extent there is so much growth, momentum, power in that one sector, how does that impact policy? How does it impact what goes on at City Hall? How does it impact, what the community and community members are trying to do in reaction to that? And I was pleased that it was in another survey that your paper had sent the candidates, posing a similar question about, where do the candidates feel about that, where they stand on that type of point. And specifically, I think the PC zoning perhaps has been a source of frustration with what we end up with. I think it's ill-defined what the so-called public benefit is. It's inconsistent, at least, what we get in exchange for changing the zoning. And there's also, I think, a systemic or a pattern that whereas maybe PC zoning was designed to change the type of zoning or allow for mixed use or creative zoning, we're seeing more and more pressure that the applicants want to change the density or have more zoning or build more or get more out of their investment. And I think the value of that, of what they end up with, is not spread very evenly. The citizens don't seem to be getting as much out of as developers add to our community. The benefit, they get a lot more out of it than we do. And especially when times are tough, I wonder, can we do more with working with them? And I think, some of the idea of somebody wants to build office space and they'll help us pay for an infrastructure need like the police station might be fine, or somebody wants to build office space and help create cultural activities downtown and university, that might be great, but I think often it just sort of convolutes the topic. I think a lot of these proposals are really are a little bit overly complex and maybe designed to confuse us.
Well, in principle, do you support the notion of granting a developer greater development rights in exchange for public benefits?
I wonder if, as it was written versus what we actually end up with, de facto it doesn't seem to work. As it's written, for whatever reason, we're getting the short end of the stick.
So looking at some that have recently been adopted, such as the JJNF development parcel, where the public benefit was a commitment to have a local neighborhood serving grocery store. Is that one that you supported or agree with?
I remember I read about it a little bit. I'm not prepared today to I'll look again at that one. But
and what about the Edgewood Plaza? Similar situation there. The benefit was going to be a neighborhood serving shopping center and a small market. And in exchange for that, certain additional development rights were granted.
I hope the solution is something that the neighbors are comfortable with. I know there was a certain amount of pushback. I remember speaking to one person. I recognized her name because I think she had gone to gun around my generation and spoke with her briefly. I think there are enough examples where we don't like the end product, like Alma Plaza, that it makes sense to look at the statute more closely and amend it. That's what I think.
Okay. So just to one more follow-up on this, the Arriaga proposal for 27 University is obviously a public benefit proposal kind of on steroids. I mean, it's by far the largest of its kind. You say that you need to do more study on that, which is reasonable given how little information is available. But as a council member, just how would you get your head around the idea of, all right, in exchange for something like a theater and other advantages of redeveloping that whole area, just how much additional development beyond what the zoning allows would you settle on? How would you go about figuring that out?
Well, one thing is I'm not applying to be mayor. I think if I was added to this council, I would be a benefit to the council, but it wouldn't be incumbent on me to change recent history and lead the way. I think I'm a good team player. I played team sports in high school and junior high, college intramurals, and it was formative, in learning my role. I was never a star of a team. I was always, doing the little things, and I don't. So I don't think it would come up to me to just unilaterally make succeed where apparently several other councils have and commissions have identified this and not really sure what to do with it. It could be fantastic, but the 27 university proposal, but it's very complicated. I mean, there's the ongoing tug-of-war and hopefully symbiotic relationship between Stanford and Palo Alto. It's great to live so close to a world-class institution. I'm not personally an affiliate, but I've benefited for most of my life living so close to Stanford, and with the renewal of the medical center, the expansion of the medical center, there was a thorough vetting, and I think more than 20 community leaders eventually endorsed it, but it took many years, and that's a huge project. I guess you could say that's a $5 billion project, and this is maybe a couple $200, $300 million project that Mr. Arriaga is proposing, but it's complicated because Stanford kind of wants to do this on their land, and John, I guess, or Mr. Arriaga is sort of their agent to do this, but he's the one we're talking to, and they're bringing in other, the beneficiary has a role, there's consultants. It's confusing to me that there's former commissioners that are on the consulting team. I hope it's something we can proceed with, but given the opportunity for the community to really have a say, be heard on what's good and bad about it. I actually, this isn't what you asked, but a year ago, I wrote a lot of letters and wrote in my blog and probably commented on your site about the availability of 456 University, the former Varsity Theater, that I thought could be a regional, unique hub for entertainment. I was suggesting that live music and that a leading regional operator could be recruited to come take that lease and revert it back to a theater. And I think some of the ideas that I was trying to articulate and why that would be valuable for our downtown and for our whole community are very similar to some of the rhetoric for including the theater in the 27 university proposal, which in fact is 250,000 square feet of office space and maybe 60 to 80 square feet of theater. It's at least 3 times as much office space as theater. And when it was reported as a theater proposal, but it's really more precisely an office proposal with the theater. I have questions about that project. I mean, various questions.
Okay, let's shift gears and talk a little bit about city finances, and in particular pension and health benefit liabilities that the city has. As you know, we have tremendous unfunded liabilities in both of those areas. Do you feel that the current council's actions to try to reduce those liabilities has gone far enough? And if not, what would you propose that council do to further work on that problem?
Well, and I have been watching it since 2009. It was part of the previous cycle, and we had a local initiative, Measure D, that directed at part of the problem, and we changed the collective bargaining agreement and the binding arbitration clause we eliminated in terms of our at least one public safety union. And I was opposed to that measure. And I recall that a commissioner, a very well-known man in the community, Ray Bacchetti, during a previous round of negotiations with the government workers, SEIU, he said it was important that as we work on our budget issues that we don't demonize our workers And I feel that the problem we have, and our budget problem, and our unfunded pension problems are related to larger macroeconomic problems that all communities are dealing with, some better than others. And to me, it relates to the idea that on a national level, there are people who pledging that there will be no new taxes. There are a situation where in recent history, the very rich pay a lower percentage of tax than the middle class sometimes. Corporations sometimes pay very little taxes. I think we've had theaters of war in at least 2 countries. We've had 7,000 Americans killed in Afghanistan and Iraq in a very costly war, and I think there'd be a peace dividend. I think there would be a peace dividend if we spent less on military spending, and that type of savings perhaps would help local municipalities balance their budgets.
So do you feel like we don't need to do anything further, and that somehow this problem is going, we'll just sort of grow our way out of this problem through additional revenue sources?
I feel the problem is being a little bit oversold. I don't have the exact answer, but I want to urge caution in how we proceed, and you know, especially also in an era where, I mean, there was a guy about my age, and he has been on the police force for, I guess, 25 or 30 years, and he's recently retired. I believe his name is Doug Keith. I might have that wrong, but he's a couple years older than me, and you know, he's earned apparently quite a nice pension from age 50 or so on, and yet, you know, in my generation, there are people who, they aren't personal friends of mine, but I've met people who've made literally billions of dollars in the private sector. You know, I've seen some of the grand jury report out of San Jose that we're using as part of our methodology for how to solve the problem, and in certain ways it's comparing the public sector benefit to Social Security. Well, that doesn't seem like a fair comparison, because when you work in the public sector, you forego the opportunity to make millions or billions in high tech or some other venture, and it seems, you know, it seems a little unfair to blame previous councils for getting us into this mistake, or blaming the workers themselves. I find it problematic to flog the working class over societal macroeconomic problems.
Okay.
Moving on to infrastructure.
Okay.
So there's estimated $500 million worth of repairs and renovations that need to be done across the city. And there was the infrastructure blue ribbon task force that kind of met and decided that there should be some changes in what the process is for fixing the infrastructure. What would you say are the most important needs when it comes to streets, buildings, new public safety building? And how do you think the city, the residents should be funding these repairs?
I feel the discussion of the infrastructure backlog is, again, a little bit oversold. I would like to read in more detail the iBrick Commission report. I would like to hear a more thorough debate of the public safety building, how urgent that is, and what we really need. Again, I found it ironic that we are telling our human assets, our public safety workers, that we can't afford them and they have to give us back. And then at the same time, we want a structure, a public safety structure. I'm not sold on what is the prevailing wisdom of the immediacy of the infrastructure needs.
So you're feeling that the money should be spent on the staffing for the city as a higher priority over some of the fixes that people say that needs to be done?
Well, everybody wants to have efficiency. Nobody wants to overspend on services or what it costs to be a Palo Altan and to live here. I'm not advocating overpaying for anything, but I'm not sold on the conclusions of the Blue Ribbon Commission or on the need for the new public safety building.
Are there any infrastructure repairs that you, just from going around town and from your experience with the city, that you do think, oh, this is something that's very important for us to look at in terms of fixing at this point?
I don't know where the demarcation line is between when we stopped knowing how to handle these issues and when we used to be able to handle these issues. That isn't clear to me either. I have no other comment on the topic.
Okay, we only have a couple minutes left, and so I want to try to encourage some short answers to a couple of issues. The California Avenue narrowing and the improvements that have been adopted by the council regarding California Avenue, are you in support of that? What is your view on that?
I followed it. I felt that other leaders and stakeholders and former council members and former aspirant council members were putting in diligence on behalf of the merchants and other residents who felt they weren't being heard. I think it's under control. Council weighed all the different sides and decided it was worth having the improvements.
So how would you have voted if you had been on the council?
I don't know. I mean, I only followed it as close to say it's another example of there being discussions and not everyone seemed happy, and maybe that's just inherent in politics that no one's ever going to be happy, but I only followed it close enough to know that I guess it's a little bit confounding. I take issue with one of the council members, one of the incumbents, who said he was flabbergasted at the issue. Well, I felt, well, it's up to it's up to government to lead and teach, and government leaders shouldn't be surprised if people don't understand what they're doing. Yet, on the other hand, I think the citizens have the right to be confused, surprised at what leadership is supposedly doing.
There's been a lot of desire on the part of residents in downtown Palo Alto for a residential neighborhood parking permit system. What are your views on that, and under what circumstances would you support a neighborhood parking program downtown?
I spend a lot of time in Palo Alto North. I actually live in an apartment, Oak Creek apartment, but my girlfriend lives Palo Alto North, so I do hear her neighbors talking about this issue. It's another issue that it is perhaps more complex, and maybe the council deliberations, although they quite often go quite into the night, maybe they don't cover the entirety of the issue. I find it remarkable that Professorville has had to wait 5 or 6 years to find a solution to a problem they are having, and they want parking permits. It's understandable that council didn't think it was time to do that, because I think there's a deeper systemic problem about, there is so much more office space and so many more workers per square foot. And a lot of that is downtown, and so that people who have jobs downtown often do park for free in the neighborhoods and walk a few blocks in. It's expensive to build parking structure. We don't know how to get more people to take the train, I guess, which would be ideal in certain ways. So it's more complex than perhaps, there was some wisdom in council punting it again, and although it does frustrate at least that neighborhood, and it's starting to, Professorville, and it's starting to frustrate downtown North more.
So it sounds like you're not ready to vote for a residential parking permit system in downtown.
The other topic is people are saying that the workers' permit and the parts of the existing structures, parking structures, or structured parking, as it says in some reports, are not being utilized efficiently, and people are trying to count that. But generally speaking, my tendency is that I believe that council listens to downtown interests and real estate interests more than they listen to residents. And so that's why a bulk of my campaign and almost all of my philosophies and rhetoric go back to saying I want to represent a residentialist point of view as distinct from a downtown or real estate point of view. So although I'm not arguing with what council did, but it is an example of perhaps residents not being heard relative to the parking czar.
Okay, that's a good place to stop. Thank you.
Thank you.